Ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat. We're about to start. Case studies. For anyone who needs translation, please make sure you have the headphone set. It's available above, because there will be parts in Polish, for example. Okay, I think we are ready to start. Case studies. We will discuss symbols of regained versus lost freedom. And it is my pleasure to invite Mrs. Anna Bernhardt from Kultura Paryska, Maisons-Laffitte.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry, I will speak Polish, and it will be better for you with good translator. Historię państw, historię narodów.
The history of nations and of states that is taught to children at school. And members of academia, scientists, they study at universities and they produce their dissertations. It's the knowledge about the future which has been present for the people who created them, which affects and shapes the future. Today, I'd like to tell you a story about wonderful places and people. A handful of people. People who had to live at a very difficult time, who survived through atrocities, and who, with no vision, only with a pen in their hand or with a typewriter, contributed to the shape of today's Poland and entire Eastern Europe, and which should be stressed here. They were active out of this country. So a few words about these people. People who contributed to the culture of Paris and how we try to preserve their story and make it shape the reality. They met on the trail of Anders' army with allied forces who fought the Nazi Germany. Jerzy Giedroyć. He was the public officer evacuated to Romania in 1939 who joined the Polish troops which were formed next to Allied forces with his younger brother Henryk. Before the war, Jerzy Giedroyć used to be the editor-in-chief of Pismo, of journal. The next person, that was Joseph Czapski, a painter and writer who was a prisoner in the Nazi concentration camps, who joined in 1941 the army, which was made by Don Majski and Sikorski, packed the Anders' army. The general entrusted him the mission to discover the story of Polish officers. Soon after that, he discovered that they were murdered in Katyn, and the evidence of that was prepared and published in Joseph Czapski's books. Sofia and Zygmunt Herz, they were during their honeymoon trip when Zygmunt was subscribed to the Polish army. They were arrested in Lviv in the 1930 by the Russians, and they were sent to the Marian Republic, Soviet Republic. Based on Majski-Sikorski Pact, they joined the Anders' army. Gustav Herling-Grudziński, under a false accusation. He was sent in 1940 to Yertsov Gulag in Russia, which what he presented in his book The Other World. He joined the Anders army and actively fought in many battles, including Monte Cassino battle, that with the anniversary of which we're just celebrating. The Yalta Pact agreement decided on the fate of the Republic of Poland. It submitted Poland to the communist regime and to the rule of Stalin. The militarized soldiers of the Anders army had two choices: go back to Poland and be subjugated and submitted to repression in Poland, and to stay as foreigners in the Western world, not accepted but free and not limited by any censorship. Our heroes decided to stay abroad and to continue their fight with their publications. That's how in 1946 the Literary Institute was established in Rome and then moved to France. The Hertz family and Herling Grudziński and the other, they were based in Maisons-Laffitte in Paris. They left 637 editions of the Culture German, 171 historical manuals, and over 400 titles of book. Jerzy Giedroyć was very concise in telling why he did it. Our task was to stir discussion and reflection, and this is what they do through their historical booklets and through the culture journal. So apart from information and all dissertations on the current situation in Poland and the discussion that took part and that gave rise to many conflicts and disputes about the future shape of Poland, about the role of Poland in Europe and in the world. The ideas were born in this house where they co-created and they cohabited since 1954. This is exactly this house which has been remained unchanged and where their people are still working. It needs to be stressed the particular role of Jerzy Giedroyć and the main editor of the Culture Journal, Juliusz Mieroszewski, with respect of independence of Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus, the Soviet Republic. This is in the Culture Journal where the ULB doctrine was born: Ukraine, Lithuania, and Belarus, as the foundation of the Eastern policy. Today, that seems something really obvious, but and evident, especially in Poland. But in mid-20th century, at the time of Stalin rule, to spread such a message was considered by many as a lunatic talk. So by no means Mieroszewski and Giedroyć gave rise to solidarity movement, which is presented today by the Polish people and which is put as an example to the Ukrainians fighting for their independence now. Giedroyć stressed the importance of literature in the creation of a state and in shaping thought about the future shape of Poland. He supported many artists and many authors. He published books which now make part of the 20th century literature canon, like Marek Łasko, Gombrowicz, Czesław Miłosz, and to enlist just a few of them. Jerzy Giedroyć took care of the Polish reader living abroad and living in Poland behind the Iron Curtain, not to leave people cut from the literature. So he published Albert Camus, George Orwell's translations, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and Boris Pasternak translations of their works. And we need to know that this small publishing house was not a wealthy institution. The Institute of Literature not only published books, but it supported the opposition within the country and creators in the country. It organized concrete help and financial help as well. So these were collections coming from all around the world to finance the cultural journal, which were then forwarded to Poland. Jerzy Giedroyć knew perfectly how important it was to preserve archives, the evidence for our future. That's why he created and collected a great collection of archives of documents, not only within the Literature Institute, but also documents documenting the lives of cohabitants of this house. Especially important is the collection of letters from readers. So Jerzy Giedroyć had this wonderful habit to preserve a copy of a letter. So 150 copies of letters to different authors, to collectors, to secret couriers, friends and colleagues, and some random people. So this correspondence offers a great bunch of information about the failures and successes and good times and bad times of the writers. The value of this collection was appreciated by UNESCO in 2009. The archive has been inscribed on the heritage list of UNESCO.
The legacy left for us by the inhabitants of this house is really very important, especially for us Poles. But also in their testament, they left us some guidelines that this is not supposed to be a museum, but a place of work. Making collections available to journalists, to historians, today is just a matter of resources. Well, you have to have the resources. To a large extent, you can place digitalized collections in virtual space. And this is what we do regularly. Involvement in conferences, films, exhibitions, they all popularize this exceptional place. But how do you make sure that a young generation becomes interested in these collections? To make sure that they feel like they are part of the past and take responsibility for this legacy. We think that the most important experience is to meet with the reality where Giedroyć and his collaborators were operating. Students visiting us under Erasmus or under scientific workshops, students who just come to us as volunteers, who live in Herlin Grudziński's room and who hold Gombrowicz and Miłosz's manuscripts in their hand, or who read Giedroyć's letters where he complains about headache, about authors. Students who work with the collections, they get sort of infected with history. When they do all these activities, they become part of history, both by publishing articles and scientific work about the Literary Institute, or when they leave comments in the social media. Or, as you were able to see on the previous slide, this is a mural made on the fence of our seat. According to a philosophy dictionary, memory is a continuation of the past. And yes, on my finishing note, this is the last sentence, but we are at the Museum of Polish History. And let me quote Marshal Piłsudski, whom Jerzy Giedroyć quoted a lot. Whoever does not respect and appreciate their past is not worthy of respect of the present, and nor does he have the right to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. There will be, hopefully, time for questions after all our presenters have delivered their presentations. And now it is my honor to invite on stage Maria Axinte from Pitesti Memorial Foundation, who will talk about Museum of Communism for Children.
Hello, everybody. So I will be talking about the Museum of Communists for Children, which was opened only in 2022, after only a few months of intense work. And it is a project imagined over time, and it was triggered by the need to provide coherent information on the history of communism for the younger generation. But to have a clearer perspective on how this museum came to be, I will have to bring you a bit back in time when we opened Pitesti Prison Memorial in 2016. So we opened the first extensive exhibition inside the former prison of Pitesti, which is a city in southern Romania, in 2016. This was the first time that Pitesti Prison Memorial was actually born for the public. Many other exhibitions and activities followed, and we were working mainly with high school students because this was our main public. Not only the team, we, the creators, were really young. All of us were under 30, not anymore. And we worked a lot with volunteers, which were high school students. So we did feel the need to address this public in particular. So we created a lot of content for a younger public. However, we decided to impose a minimum age to our visitors, which is 12 years old. And that was because the information in the museum focuses on Pitesti phenomenon or Pitesti experiment, which was an extremely violent action undertaken by the communist regime against anti-communist students. We talk about systematic physical and psychological torture. We talk about moral degradation, blasphemy, suicide, murder. Pitesti phenomenon was about morally and psychologically destroying the victims. It was about forcing them to renounce all emotional values, all emotional ties, all moral values. And in the end, pushing the victims into becoming aggressors of their own colleagues and friends. That, during the 2 years of this hell, was almost impossible, even though at the same time in Romania, political prisoners were dying every day in different prisons across the country. The action was supposed to compromise the anti-communists and completely deter them from future action against the communist regime. The subject, as you notice, was already difficult, but we had to address our increasing young audience. So between 2017 and 2019, we created a lot of activities that focused on the younger public. And we created workshops on communism and the history of communism, repression and resistance. In 2018, we published a graphic novel which tells the story of young students imprisoned in the prison for minors, for children in Romania. And of course, this story does not include violence. The communist authorities were trying to destroy emotional ties between the children. And of course, they imposed a very severe regime to those who refused to accept communist ideas. But because the main character of the book was the youngest political prisoner in Romania, Ioan Lada, which was 12 years old at the time of his arrest, we proposed this album to be a fundamental piece of literature for children in learning about the communist dictatorship. And we were also inspired to create our first exhibition in the Pitești Prison Memorial dedicated to children under 12 years old. So what you see in the images is a first exhibition based on the graphic novel with the artist's works, and it includes information about children who were imprisoned and repressed by the communist regime. Of course, this also motivated us to go further. We realized children need more information. They were curious, and we have to try to talk to them about the past of their grandparents. So in 2022, we started working on a new project, a very daring project, the Museum of Communists for Children. And so this exhibition was prepared in only 4 months. We had a budget of less than 20,000 euros, and it is still a small museum. We hope to enlarge it in the future. But the team was quite small but very professional. We brought together museologists, museum educators, historians, children, high school students, but also secondary school students and teachers. And we opened this exhibition on the 23rd of August, 2022. More than 400 people joined, and amongst them was also a survivor of Pitești prison, not a survivor of Pitești phenomenon, but he talked to the kids about his experience in this prison, and this happened when he was just a student in 1952. During the opening, we also launched a workbook and a textbook. The workbook is a kind of a personalized journal that helps children go through this experience, because we imagine it's not easy for them. And the textbook was also guided by the curriculum at school. So we tried to make all the materials relevant and kind of touch upon what children learn in school already. Starting from next year, the history of communism was introduced as a mandatory subject in school, in high schools. So it seems like it will be even more useful in the future. Guided tours have become the main way of interacting with the museum's public after the opening, precisely because they offer us the opportunity to always be in touch with the children's needs and curiosities, presenting the information in a format that is as age appropriate as possible. Also, this allows us for dialogue, continuous dialogue with the children, and we also can talk about all the words that they don't know in the museum, like propaganda, democracy and dictatorship, also about the different regimes that happened in communist Romania. The tour is complemented by workshops, of course. We tried, for example, to invite the students to vote for their preferred method of learning in the beginning of the workshop. And they choose between classical methods used at school or interactive methods. Of course, they use the interactive methods, but we rigged the votes like the communists did, and so children get very upset that we didn't follow their votes, and this is how they are introduced to the way communists took power in Romania. Of course, we continue with their preferred method, but just to give you an idea, we also read through the story of Nina Moica, a political prisoner who was only 15 at the time of the arrest. And the whole museum is based on stories of children who were members of resistance groups, who actually created resistance groups, who were born in prison, who were imprisoned in the prison for children, or who in some way or the other were repressed by the regime. And of course, being located inside the former prison of Pitești, The museum also speaks of the memorial value of the space where the dictatorship was extremely cruel. Of course, we don't delve into the very specific elements of Pitesti phenomenon, but being present in this building gives us an opportunity to start a discussion about repression, resistance, and political detention, themes otherwise very difficult and abstract for many children. We are not sure that this is an example of the results of our work with children. And this is a very intricate model of a plan of the museum, because we are still expanding the museum and children are co-curators, and they have been from the beginning, because before the museum was open and we decided what we will have in the museum, we held workshops with around 300 children from different parts of Romania to make sure that we know their thoughts, their ideas. We are not sure that the Museum of Communists for Children is unique. When we opened, a journalist asked if we are sure this is unique in the world. And he asked, maybe there is some Museum of Communism in Cuba. And my reply was, maybe it's a different kind of museum of communist ideology, so definitely not what we were looking for. But because we know it could be relevant to a larger audience around the world, we are trying to be present in English online. We are also trying to have more content in English. We are on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and we hope in the future on YouTube. And we received the news yesterday that for a new exhibition on repression and resistance groups created by children, we will receive a new funding soon. Not a lot of money, but it will help us develop the museum further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very inspiring. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Aleksandra Kumala from FestivALT Kraków.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I would like today to introduce you to Difficult Heritage Remembrance Framework. But before I do, I would like to talk a little bit about the people behind it. And we are the Engaged Memory Consortium. And it was formed in 2020 by 3 Polish Jewish organizations based here in Poland. The first one being FestivALT, that I'm representing, and based in Kraków, and the second one being Zapomniane Foundation, Fundacja Zapomniane in Polish, from here, from Warsaw, and the third one being the Urban Memory Foundation from Wrocław. And we've been collaborating ever since, and you can see some of our projects. All of them are funded by the European Union. And as you can see, we're working a lot with difficult heritage, difficult pasts, and also with kind of engaging people into remembering in a participatory way. And here I won't be going into much detail in the slide, but I just wanted to show you like the timeline of our activity. As you can see, we were starting kind of as a small unit, and we are kind of expanding through time and having bigger projects, bigger fundings, and doing things on a bigger scale. And the Difficult Heritage Remembrance Framework that I want to talk about a little bit more is an effect of the NEDIPA project, meaning negotiating difficult pasts. And it's like a living open resource that was made using our using the examples of the things that we made, of the activities that we took up, and of the people we've met, and the sites we managed to commemorate. But the idea is that it's not a closed document. We want it to be open for people to add to that. Their experiences, their examples, so it's kind of like available for everyone, for different stakeholders, for activists, for local people who want to engage in commemorating their local history or the history of the local community, or of the multicultural history of the region. So they all can use it freely. It's available online, and it's accessible in Polish and in English. So I guess that's a really big advantage of this project, that it's accessible for many people. And what we were thinking about while creating it is that we didn't want it to be only the examples. We wanted it also to have like a toolbox for people to use. So we were discussing their like useful methodologies or useful, like the framing that can be useful for people. For example, what is a difficult heritage? If someone wants to know it in order to work with it, then we provide the definitions. And it's also full of guidelines. For example, if you want to work with Jewish cemetery, what do you do? Who do you contact? What does the halacha, the Jewish law says about remembering and commemorating old cemeteries? So it's all full, I hope, it's all full of useful contexts and informations for people to use. So I encourage you, if only you're interested, to take a look into that. And it's not only practice and it's not only theory, but it's also research. As you can see here, we were also talking to people and kind of trying to find out how do they envision commemorating, for example, local non-memory site or local Jewish cemetery. How do they want it to be commemorated? So we really wanted all of our projects to be participatory and not just like going there and telling people, okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put a memorial here or something. No, for us, that's not the way to do it. So we were kind of in dialogue with the local institutions and activists and organizations, and also with local inhabitants, in order to engage them all in this process, sometimes challenging, as you can probably imagine, of commemorating and of remembering. And we thought that it would be useful to use, for example, the in-depth interviews that we made, and to include it into this ebook for people also to gain knowledge about what do ordinary people think about such activities and how to work with them. So as I said, all of this is accessible online. You can visit the site NDIPA.eu, and there you can download the Difficult Heritage Remembrance Framework for free. As I said, it's both in Polish and in English. There's also a NDIPA multimedia library created by us, so we wanted also to give like a living resource for people to use and to adapt to. So if only you have some examples or case studies or just like reflections that you want to share with people, you can always contact us, and we want to update this file and this site as soon as possible. And coming to the case study, this one is really close to my heart because Chrzanów is my hometown, and it's located between Kraków and Oświęcim. And I wanted to discuss this specific example with you because the ebook I was talking about is full of different examples, but this one is special because on the photo in the background you can see the great synagogue of Chrzanów being demolished, and it happened as late as in the 70s. It was the communist government decision to demolish it. The local authorities wanted to establish a museum there or a library, but it was destroyed. And before the war, the Jewish community of Chrzanów was like 50% of its inhabitants. So as you can imagine, such a demolition was pretty symbolic and hard for us to think about and to think about how to commemorate it. And what we think, what we were thinking about doing was not establishing a monument or another memory board. We were thinking about green commemorations, which is a way of commemorating that we are discussing in this ebook that I've mentioned. And it's about using the plants or using the nature as an ally in the process of commemorating. And the idea was that the three artists, two of them being from Chrzanów, Katarzyna and Marta Sala, they are sisters, and the third one being Robert Jerachmiel Snijderman, whose family flew from Poland around the war. So their idea was to plant a tree, a willow tree, in the place of the synagogue, because there was a synagogue and it was demolished, and then there was a willow tree and it was cut like in 2017 or ish. So they thought that maybe instead of putting a memory board there or a monument, it will be like a nice gesture to put a tree there. And they did. And because the place where the synagogue stood was before the war called the Esther Square, they named the willow, named the willow also Esther, so it's Esther's willow. And it was pretty amazing to witness how people engaged in this happening event, because it was open, of course, to the inhabitants of Chrzanów, and it was done in collaboration with the local institutions, the local museum, and the local authorities. And the idea was that there was a procession, you can see them walking, and they were walking from the train station in Chrzanów to the city center, and it was the exact reverse of the way that the Chrzanów Jews were taking when they were transported from the ghetto to Auschwitz concentration camp. And so it was kind of symbolic, and it was also very participatory, because as you can see, people were gathering there, we were planting the tree, and there was a concert of a Slovak band, Mojsha Band. So we wanted for people to be like a happy and symbolic event, but not only about mooring. And I guess we succeed, because people are really, like the inhabitants of Chrzanów are really taking care of the tree and, you know, planting it or watering it and really taking care of it. So this like living green monument really did a great job here. And just like to end up with this, there's also an ebook about the green commemoration that I was quite chaotically talking about, and it's also available on the NEDIPA website, and it's also in Polish and in English, so if only you're interested, be our guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our speakers are called out in alphabetical order, but it so turned out that ladies went first. And now I'll pass the floor to Vjeran Pavlaković from University of Rijeka.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. It's always great to be here in an event organized by ENRS. And I'll be talking about memory politics in the former Yugoslavia, but really focusing on Croatia. And in the past, I've looked mostly at, let's say, official or top-down memorialization and memory politics. But today's presentation will be about maybe some bottom-up or a new form of it, which is part of my new project. So it's been 30 years since the wars, and for Croatia, the Croatian War of Liberation, or the Homeland War, as it's called, there definitely is a lot of thoughts and emphasis also on freedom. I mean, it's definitely part of the narrative. But so was the situation after the Second World War. I mean, it was the People's Liberation Movement, or the War of Liberation, and the socialist memoryscape in Croatia and the other former Yugoslav republics were filled with many monuments, many that were figurative, but we also had the very abstract ones, the socialist modernist phase that maybe many people have seen in memes or even in exhibitions, some which were mobilizing the best artists that throughout the country. And in the 1990s, a lot of these were destroyed, vandalized, removed, modified, and so on. And here are just these, again, the same two examples from the previous slide, the one in Srb and in Kamenska. And also in the title of my talk, I mentioned from vandalism to these murals. And so we can see that in this case, graffiti was used to destroy or mark or delegitimate some of these monuments that were located, again, throughout Croatia, but in other countries as well. And since the 1990s, there have been efforts to rebuild some of these as parts of coalition governments or dealing with the past, let's say, or even reconciliation, which is a very loaded term. On the one on the left, at Srb was rebuilt in 2010 and still a contested site of memory, but the one on the right, the Vojin Bakić's amazing piece of artwork, it's impossible to actually rebuild that one just because of the cost involved, but it also, we can also see how new digital technology has been used to revive this monument. This was from last year. It's not quite the same size as the original, but it was a digital image of that monument, and it brought together the local community in a part of Croatia that's really been hit by demographic loss and destruction from the war as well. In addition to this destroyed/rebuilt memoryscape, we have the new memoryscape related to the war of the 1990s. We can also discuss aesthetics, whether it's of the same caliber or not, but definitely a very thick memoryscape. Sometimes these monuments living next to each other, sometimes on the site of a destroyed monument. So it's very dense, but the main focus of my talk and also this case study or this new project I have is about the murals, which I think is involving the younger generation. It's oftentimes also bottom up. And in my opinion, although there are many obviously patriotic images, there's also ones reflecting things such as the genocide in Srebrenica. Actually interesting, it's the one that's in English. But unfortunately also a militarization of the past and also celebration or glorification of war criminals. And in this case, we have Ratko Mladić, but it's not just what's going on in Serbia. And the one in the bottom left, we can see a lot of veterans mobilized to defend what is considered to be a controversial mural with symbols and messages which perhaps aren't appropriate for an open city such as Zadar, where that was taken, which is based on tourism. So this is my newest project. It's called Mempop, and we're looking at the mnemonic aesthetics of popular culture. So moving from those official memory politics of the monuments and the commemorations to looking at other forms. And I'm focusing on the murals, but colleagues in the project are looking at film, festivals, and also popular music, some of which is nostalgic, and other aspects which is controversial or criticizing the past. And in Croatia and also the other parts of the former Yugoslavia, definitely popular culture is present and maybe even obsessed by the war in the past, whether it's in film, whether it's in video games about the battle for Vukovar, or you can also get rakia in a memorial flask, as you can see there, music and so on. So it's definitely present, and now it's how is the younger generation going to think about these things? Is it exclusively through violence and war and battle, or as the title of this symposium, thinking about freedom in the future? And these murals don't function just as street art or graffiti. So it's come a long way from the vandalism. These are official sites of memory that are even being blessed by priests. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner. So these function as sacred spaces that people come and light candles to. They're, in effect, replacing the classic, whoa. This is, well, they're replacing the classic monumental forms, and they're actually quite impressive and sophisticated. These aren't just football groups doing graffitis, but actually really impressive memorialization. But as I mentioned, there's also war criminals being glorified. This is in Karlovac in Croatia on there. And I included some from Poland because Poland is also one of my case studies, and we can see what's interesting about the Polish case. There's a lot of top-down and institutionally supported muralization. Perhaps many of you have seen some of these around Warsaw and elsewhere. But I think there is a positive potential for murals in art, and also recovering memory that has been obliterated. I grew up in Arizona, and there's a long history of violence and forgetting and oblivion, whether it's the indigenous peoples or the Hispanic legacy, and murals can sometimes be used to recover these. In this case, using the font of the University of Arizona, remembering and reminding people of the indigenous people that once used to live there. And just as murals can be mobilized and street art mobilized for contemporary events, very quick responses, in this case, the war in Ukraine, they're also ephemeral, and they can disappear very quickly. So it's an interesting subject matter. I mean, monuments can also be erased, but not as quickly as the murals themselves. And just some more examples from the US where talking about immigration or other protests. So how, as a scholar, we study these things and think about them, but also taking on the role as an activist. And as the final slide, I wanted to show maybe a positive image, and this was a project with project money at my university. And this is how we're thinking about freedom, breaking down the walls and looking to the future and involving students in it. So not just a muralization of the war, but also a muralization of looking to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Ihor Poshyvailo will take us to Maidan Museum, Kyiv.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting me here. It's a great pleasure and honor to join such important, so relevant to Ukraine, and so impressive conference. I work in the Maidan Museum, which was founded as a grassroots initiative, and we deal with a lot of symbols, connotations, phenomena, notions, and you can see in this crossword some of them. And I hope you will guess after my brief presentation what the Maidan Museum is about. It's quite symbolic that the most well-known proponent of social justice, freedom, human rights, Nelson Mandela ended his earthly life exactly the same time when in Kyiv, Kyiv's capital, the Euromaidan was expanding its first barricades in 2013. And it was really very important for Ukraine's choice of freedom. And we understand that this war, the current war, is also a kind of a response to the Euromaidan events from Russian side. And Kremlin regime clearly declared, and it was mentioned today in the morning session during so-called Putin's revelations about history, that it was revenge for Euromaidan events and for Ukrainian nation choice towards freedom and towards joining the democratic European family. It was mentioned by foreign researchers that the new nation was born in Ukraine during Euromaidan or Maidan, a revolution intrinsic towards freedom, liberty, social justice, and human rights. And to document that events in 2013-2014, a number of public initiatives like representing self-defense of Maidan, several museums. We self-organized and started to document the events, the emotions, collecting oral stories, objects. And we never considered that earlier or later there will be a kind of a museum in a classical, traditional understanding. It was just a museum because it was a collection of artifacts and documents and witnesses. So in this connection, we envisioned, we conceptualized back in 2014, during the events, the Maidan Museum as a kind of a freedom museum. And our initiative was named in that period Maidan Museum / Freedom Museum. And so we envisioned three main basic elements of our structure. And you can see here in the slide concerning foundation, pillars and walls and roofs, and all they are connected to general concepts of freedom, of human rights, and it is based on public civil demand. It is ended by, for example, the policies of remembrance of Ukraine. So it's a combination of the reality we live in Ukraine in that period. The structure of the National Memorial to Heavenly Hundred and the Revolution of Dignity Museum is a three-component memorial to commemorate those people who were killed, the museum, and the Freedom House, so-called Freedom House, which is in fact the Civil Rights Center and Democracy Center. Because our idea from the very beginning was not to create the historical museum, the museum which will tell the story about important event of the past. Vice versa, we would like to use the story, the historical event, to tell, to direct the vector into the future, telling about the human rights, telling about the basic universal values like freedom, which was so clearly and so powerfully manifested in Ukraine during Maidan, which was in fact one of the biggest in Europe protests, which lasted 94 days, and more than 8 million people participated in it. So we are located in the very downtown of Kyiv, in a symbolic, political, cultural heart of Ukraine. It's 3 hectares of land, and it's very symbolic that our memorial and museum is a kind of a complex which starts at the Maidan Square, which is Independence Square, and we conceptualize it like a kind of agora, a place where people come and share the ideas of democracy and freedom. And it was really during our Maidans, I mean the biggest protest during regaining our independence since 1991, and coming over the authentic place, memorial place, where the biggest number of people were shot down by riot police on February 2014, to this place, to the site where the museum should be constructed. So we have a kind of a Parthenon, the Temple of Freedom, and we have this agora. So it's also like symbolic combination which is based on notions of freedom and independence. So the memorial, we had international competition, first time in Ukraine, and provided by German architectural company Fasein from Berlin. And but until now, we cannot start constructing the memorial because investigation is not completed and the territory is arrested by General Prosecution Office. But the memorial is envisioned not only as a trauma space, but as a space to provide multi-layered narratives and to engage and to be the place not only for families of the killed or wounded people or activists, friends, but to be the place important for the future generations, for children. And it's not easy. And we discuss these days how to bring back this memory, how to protect memory, especially traumatic memory, how to tell so-called bad news according to today's situation and perspectives for the future. So in this connection, we have several parts, and one of the parts is not only about commemoration, it's an alley of trees, and in the previous presentation, it was greatly mentioned how to use nature and trees as a part of memory. So it's about life, not about death, but about life. So the museum itself, the building itself, is also was found out due to the results of international competition. Another German company from Berlin won, Gleichus plus Gleichus, and you can see 6 stories building, 27 square meters. of the space. And what is interesting that this is a space, the draft of our space program, and only 31% of the whole space, total space, we plan to give for exhibitions. The rest of the space will be for some activities. It will be a Freedom House, it will be Children's Museum, it will be studios, different experimental spaces, and also space for public activists, because we envision that this museum should be kind of a prototype of Maidan, where people came together when they expresses fantastic ideas and manifestations of democracy, of solidarity, of communication between each other. And also the problem is, and the biggest challenge is how to turn the Maidan Museum into a multidisciplinary platform for dialogue, for reconciliation, because at the moment we have this period when the communication memory, the memory which we keep as a subject of history, and it will be kept at least for 3-5 generations, and later it will be turned into so-called cultural memory. And the only one narrative will be created, but it's later, maybe in a historical distance of 50 years. So how to approach these issues today? How to talk sometimes difficult issues, how to present the story not in the black and white colors. So it's a big challenge. And due to these challenges, we organize a lot of classical events, like our collection is the most representative in Ukraine. It's quite representative, and we organize exhibitions not only in Ukraine but abroad, and in the House of European History. We were happy that to have participate in 2 first exhibitions. But after 22, our collection changed, because it's also a manifestation of our civil responsibility as a museum, as institutions. We don't want to be in the past. We would like to correspond to the reality, to the situation, to the most public needs. And we launched expeditions, and we document at this moment the manifestations of civil resistance and the fight against the Russian aggressor today. And so we have a lot of objects in our collection now. Activities quite classical, but behind this we have exhibitions, not having a permanent spaces. We have a lot of platforms in Ukraine and outside, and you can see one of our latest exhibition about identity war, the power of cultural resistance, which was showed in Ukraine and in Oslo. And also we have a lot of traveling exhibitions, and one of them, Destroy Temples of Ukraine, is about attack on religious freedom. It was unveiled in one of the main Ukrainian UNESCO sites, Kyiv-Pечерsk Lavra, after so-called derussification of this site, and it was presented in front of the US Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was shown in Canada. Right now this exhibition travels in Canada, so for us it's very important. And the protest, the architecture of protest exhibition, we also participated in Frankfurt recently. So we have a very important open-air space in a political and cultural center in Kyiv on Maidan, and this is our stance, exhibition stance. So we have possibility to tell, to display, to present our narrative, and to engage people into our history. A lot of commemoration spaces over these 3 hectares of land in Kyiv's downtown. And finalizing, of course, we have launched a lot of educational programs, because children and people is our target audience. A few years ago, we had a very resonant post in social media when one schoolboy post in social media addressed to adults. He said, "Okay, adults, why do not you talk with us about Maidan? Because it is important, it's about future, it's about our future. But you protected us during the events, you do not took us to the events, but why do not you speak about?" So we responded, and we launched a graphic story, published, and we launched a lot of also educational events. And you can see we have exhibition and information center in the formerly burned trade union building, which is now reconstructed, and we have there. Also, we founded the Protest Art Gallery, also as a very important asset to experiment and to tell and to conceptualize a concept of freedom. And when the war started, our museum co-founded the Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, also as a manifestation of a museum mission in today's world. So we launched a lot of field work, and we established a lot of partnerships at the moment, and finally, so Maidan Museum is about freedom. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And our last presenter is Florian Traussnig from Ludwig Boltzmann Institute.
Thank you. Okay, there we go. In early 1942, you see the energetic faces of two young, unlikely American soldiers sitting in front of a mountain lodge in the upper northwest, somewhere in the mountains of the US. The man on the left-hand side, Peter Nassau from Vienna, a refugee. He managed to escape in 1938, the Anschluss to the German Reich, surviving as a Jew, made it to the US, joined and volunteered for the so-called, was later called the 10th US Mountain Division. On the right-hand side, you see Otto Korban from Graz. He was also an immigrant to the US. They were not just unlikely soldiers, refugees who ended up in the other military, not the German one, who fought later against the Wehrmacht. They were also athletes, skiers, young, energetic men. And when they arrived in the US, they saw also what we call agency. Yeah? They saw the chance to make an impact in the war. So they might have become heroes later, but I'm very sensitive with this term. They were also, they wanted to maybe ski also during war. So it was a little bit also of self-realization. The US knew that they would face the German Wehrmacht. Germany first was the doctrine even before Pearl Harbor. And Europe is full of mountains. The US also, if Germany would invade, is also mountainous, the Rocky Mountains, the Appalachians. And they saw also how the Finns battled against the Soviets very successfully with ski troops. So the US built up an entirely new unit. And they did not have the knowledge, the skiing knowledge, the alpinistic knowledge. So there was a small but highly influential wave of about 100 Austrians serving in that division, showing and teaching them how to climb, how to ski, how to fight in the mountains. And as it is the American style of doing these things, so they put it up from the scratch, and then on an industrial scale, they built very quickly this mountain troop to face the Wehrmacht in their own continent. Yes. Here you'll see an elite troop of ski trainers. And I'll give you another case, bottom on the right side, smiling with the Herbert Schneider. He is not from Vienna, not a Jew. He is a Catholic ski star, so to speak, from Tyrol, from the place where Austria's heart of skiing culture is. And his father was a ski hero also in World War I and a ski teacher. And he was an opponent of the Nazi regime and had to flee with his son. They built up an entire ski resort in the US, and he also volunteered to fight against the German Wehrmacht and to become a mountain soldier. So what we have here is a cultural transfer. Yeah? They can make an impact, they can realize themselves as skiers, and they can contribute to the liberation of their continent. His father, as I mentioned, a senior ski hero, said in the press, 1933 in September, October, auf Wiedersehen in einem freien Österreich. So let's see us again in a free, reconstituted Austria. That was a mere wish at that time. So in this, a little bit later, his son trained here. For instance, talking about geography, this is a 4,000-meter volcano in the northwest of the US, the Mount Rainier. So at 3,000 and 4,000 meters, they showed the Americans how to climb, how to fight. And they trained nearly for 3 years. And the call to the battlefield was pretty late. And in early 1945, some 50 of these 100 Austrians who helped build up this mountain division arrived at the battlefield of their former continent, so very close to Austria, where they had to flee. And when we talk about our two guys, Nassau on the left, he was a very aggressive, risky so-called first scout who nearly got killed in battle because he was always the first to do some intelligence and reconnaissance. And he used also his language skills to trick the Germans. And Schneider, the one at the bottom right, he was also quick thinking. Once during night he was approached by a German enemy, and he just answered in Tyrolean dialect. So he tricked him and he could retreat. So both could have been killed easily. It was a very bloody battle. Italy was not the decisive theater of war. It was D-Day in Normandy and in the east, the Soviets. So still 1,000 people of this 14,000-man division were killed. And of our Austrians, also 4 have been killed. And the third of the 50, around 50 fighting Austrians in this American unit were wounded in action. So it was quite a bloody contribution to the liberation. We have an ongoing pop-up travel exhibition. If you're interested, I brought a few copies, and we are also in English, so we can also, if you want to host this or see this exhibition, it's possible to show it in the international context. Okay, we're approaching our last. Yes. Of course, I critically mentioned that there's a little bit of myth-making, heroism. During the war, it turned out that although the motifs at the beginning of these people were not that clear, so Schneider, the Tyrolean, was clearly a volunteer, but not all of them were volunteers or anti-fascists from the very start. So like people are, they are full of ambivalences, and some wanted to ski even in war. But what we can, when we think about the end, what did they contribute? Yeah? They nearly got killed, few of them got killed. They took part in the liberation, and this is quite, it can be also a little bit of a myth. That's the very home of Hannes Schneider, of the soldier you see at the doorstep. It's Herbert Schneider, and his father said, "Let's see us again in the liberated Austria," and that's that anecdote. So he marches in as a foreigner with American uniform, returns to his home, and the people there say, "What the Americans, what are they doing?" They just march into, what do they think? And then the chambermaid says, "Oh Jesus, that's Herbert, that's our Herbert." So this is a story not told too often in Austria, that Jewish and refugees and also opponents of the regime were victors, not victims. So it has been merged into our remembrance discourse pretty late. And with our traveling pop-up exhibition, we want to contribute to raise awareness here. And I mentioned a quote at the very beginning. The title of my presentation is, "Though I hate war, I felt that I needed to try to make a contribution." So these were unlikely soldiers, as we see here, the last quote. We volunteered to join the 10th Mountain Division, but we were still civilians at heart. That means when we're talking about ethics, if the totalitarian regime has to be fought, people also have to negotiate their view towards pacifism, towards ethics. The goal is preserving or liberating a continent from Nazism. And as this symposium is called Freedom, so this is a contribution to freedom regained. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to all the presenters, and this is now the time. We have been waiting for the time to, for you, ladies and gentlemen, to ask questions to our presenters. We are happy to hand in a microphone, and all our speakers are there to address your concerns. Oh, yep. Shall I? Just a second. Unless you want to try and just use your loud voice. I'm sorry, we are just facing. Yes. Okay, we just need to use our voice because we were, yes, just. Yeah, absolutely.
So, of course, we are located in a former prison and we have to talk about the history of the former prison, so naturally we talk about repression. With the nostalgia part, it's very difficult not to explain nostalgia when you talk about repression, because when we talk about repression, we talk about repressed memory as well. So, because there was such violent repression also in the area, in the county where the museum is located, there was also a need for people to repress their memories to be able to overcome and go back to their daily lives. So when children hear about what happened during communism, about repression, of course they ask, why do people still feel nostalgic? But we did discover that children have a mind of their own and they seem to be very emotionally intelligent, and they kind of ask the questions, the difficult questions, more than adults do. So in a way, they answer their own questions with regards to nostalgia. We don't have to answer them. And in Romania, it's very difficult to talk about communism because it's still very present in our daily lives. So I would say that of course, we have multiple perspectives, but we don't have a perspective yet. We need to keep talking about it to actually put it on the table for the public. We don't really have that much discussion on communism in Romania. We only have 2 former prisons that became museums, and they are both private. The state does not invest. It started investing very late and not that substantially. So I would say communism is not really a major theme as research in Romania. But we do use multiple perspectives because fortunately we have the files of the former secret police that are now for public research. We also have a lot of interviews with people. We also have researchers and educators who have really concerned themselves in their studies with how we talk to the public about this. So I would say that we do have multiple perspectives. Of course, in a presentation of 10 minutes, it's not possible to actually talk about all the perspectives that we are using. But this museum also doesn't just speak about repression. I mentioned in my presentation that we felt the need to provide a context for our visitors because we cannot talk about repression out of nowhere. So we do have to give a context, and we talk about, we actually in the Pitesti Prison Memorial, we start from 1918 when Romania became one country, and this is the generation that later on was imprisoned by the communists. Then in the Museum of Communists for Children, we start talking about Marx and Engels, so we start from very early on, and we hope to continue until today. In Pitesti Prison Memorial, we end with 1989 and the bloody revolution in Romania. But in the Children's Museum, we plan to bring it even much closer to present days. So I hope this answers your question. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Yep, please. Tak.
Bardzo przepraszam.
Well, apologies. My question is going to be short, and the pathway to the mic was long. Yes, first of all, I would like to thank Madame Bernhardt for her presentation about Maisons-Laffitte. I don't know whether you realize, ladies and gentlemen, and I apologize for saying this, that half of Polish political culture, modern political culture, has its roots right there. I'd say better half of the Polish political culture has its roots right there. So my question applies or concerns the financing of your memorial. How is it financed? Was the Polish state involved, and to what extent?
For our speakers, the question was about the funding, the financing of Maisons-Laffitte.
Okay. Pytanie jest zawsze delikatne, oczywiście o
Of course, it's a sensitive issue to talk about money.
Jesteśmy stowarzyszeniem
We
niezależnym fundacją
operate as an independent cultural association, the foundation under the French laws, and we have a similar foundation which is set up here in Poland. So we accept donations. We are financed within programs by ministries in different forms. The greatest proportion of amount of money come under different programs based on agreements made with ministries, and we have other cultural foundations supporting us financially. But I'd like to go back to the previous topic. We are not a museum. We have an archive. We are the place where history was made, and in our narrative, as we present and as we brag about the place, because we think it's worth that, we share the story of a handful of people in a foreign country without any language and without any support in difficult financial conditions. They could make choices and they could pursue their choices and their objectives, which were important to them. And today's Poland is a result from their work. And so that means that you can present history and you can cope with the circumstances in any situation, no matter how difficult it is. You need just to be consistent and to follow your imperative of freedom that you have internally, that we all share at any age.
Because we have technical issues. Maisons-Laffitte is funded mainly thanks to donations, and this is exactly picturing how years ago a small group of people with no resources, no money, no funding, no support was able to guard culture, Polish culture. So we can compare that to the present functioning of Maisons-Laffitte. Any more questions? I think we are running out of time anyway, but just one last chance. The microphones are working. So maybe we should use that opportunity. So maybe I will have one last question to Ihor. What are your development plans? Do you plan to focus on international audience or local audience? Do you think what the museum wants to show is of more relevance to locals or the European audience? It should be working now.
Thank you for your question. Of course, we orient to different audiences, to local, national, international, because we understand that the Maidan events were not important only to Ukraine. Even to Timothy Snyder, Euromaidan make relevant and actualized the principles of European Union, which in many situations are being neglected. So in this situation, we would like our story to be important for the rest of the European countries, and therefore our exhibitions, our educational programs are focused on international audiences. And what is interesting that according to our audiences research, we have this information center in the very center of Kyiv. On Maidan, more than 50% of visitors are foreigners, and a special category of these people are young people from Hong Kong, from Belarus, who came in mostly anonymous, and they tried to learn the story of Ukrainians fighting for freedom. And our experience is quite important to them. And in this connection, we understand that we should not only close the story inside Ukraine. But the other important issue that a lot of I would say, museums which are connected to memory or to conflicted history right now, they are redeveloping or regaining their identities because of this war. And before the large-scale aggression, Ukrainian government launched, at least supervised, 3 main projects, museum projects, which were connected to memory. The Holodomor Museum complex, Baba Yar, connected to Holocaust, and the Maidan Museum. And in this connection, we've heard a lot of some scandals, some different points of view, different approaches as how to present the conflicted story to multiplied audiences and how to make it relevant to the future generations. But at this moment, even the Second World War Museum is also very active. And a lot of museums connected to memory, to history, right now regaining their own identity and change their programs, their audiences, and their visions for the future. And a quick comment to the previous answer. In Ukraine, this education for children and this nostalgia for the past, we had some exhibitions in Ukraine provided by historical museums which were connected to Soviet past. And what is interesting that in some parts of audiences, these exhibitions which were really developed and designed to blame the communist regime, they gained some nostalgia, especially older people. And it was a paradox, and it was a big debate how to better provide narrative and how not to develop this kind of nostalgia, but empathy towards the. But concerning that question, how to develop narratives, how to educate children, as Robert Kostro said in the previous session, personal stories play a special role because institutions develop their own narratives. The governments impose sometimes to historical and memory institutions their own political main narrative. But there are individual stories. And in Ukraine, for example, a lot of personal stories were imprisoned or just there was amnesia imposed by Soviet regime. Right now we are regaining the story. And the communist past are very closely connected to our present day. Because this war is not only the war for the future, it's also the war for the past, for the history, for the memory. And Russian regime, Putin, clearly would like to reestablish new empires, communist empire. And therefore this fight and all this is relevant. And our children, being in the context of what's going on today, they better understand our past, especially connected to communist regime.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all those very inspiring case studies. It was very informative, very inspiring. I think we will leave this room with a lot of new ideas. But before we do that, it's time for turbo presentations. Thank you, everyone.